It's without a doubt that this is a special edition of Grab a Coffee podcast. I mean, look at I, look at Raymond. Impeccably suave and debonair. Big things are going, as they say in this part of the world. But yes, welcome to this edition of Grab a Coffee podcast. My name is Kasiate, Simon Kasiate.
And my name is Mujini, Raymond Mujini. Have I mastered it now?
You have now aced it, Raymond. And yes, we're all looking $1 million simply because in the week starting this one that we are in, the National Social Security Fund did announce a 13.5% interest rate on our savings with the NSSF. And as a show of respect for big monies, or should I say free monies, we have decided that this week we're going to be all in suits.
But no, we need to separate our reasons. Your reason is NSSF. Because I know the reason why you're happy. Your amount, your 13.5% is really too high. My 13.5% is remarkably low.
Raymond, stop unleashing attack dogs on me.
And of course, this episode is proudly sponsored by MultiChoice and their Showmax episode Show Now, which you can get for 11,400 using your Momo, and you'll have access to all their entertainment, including the FIFA World Cup.
Or simply catching up with some Kampala cream, Showmax is where all your favorite entertainment is. But also importantly, this is the week where Uganda is officially into what we term on this podcast, the silly season. 8 presidential candidates nominated to run for the 2026 presidential election. And I must insist, it's 8 men, not a single woman in the race for a country that's close to 50 million, of whom more than 50% of the population is female. And later on in the program, we'll be discussing what disincentivizes women in Uganda and maybe elsewhere in the world from aspiring for the big office.
I think it's a complex question, and I don't know if we should start to talk about it now or wait in the future. But I know one female candidate who had submitted signatures, Yvonne Pampara, who wrote in a statement that she had felt disenfranchised by the Electoral Commission, that the communication about signatures came late and offered a very little time to go back into the field to get those signatures. She's, I think, the only female person that I know who had gone to pick the nomination forms and return them. So I think
there was also Nabira Birungi, who also attempted and only was successful after the point of not being nominated.
Oh, yes. And I think we also had a secondary school student who had wanted to run for the presidency. We don't know the scale of what has happened to her and her ambitions. But I know many other people who submitted their signatures, and the Electoral Commission got back to them really letting them know that their signatures are insufficient, and they had very little time to try and remedy that.
I mean, let's not forget that there was over 200 people that picked nomination forms, and we just have 8 folks on the roll of the ballot.
Exactly. And I don't know, we need to take a decision as a podcast. Do we discuss all these candidates as equal? Because they're genuinely not equal. There are some candidates who I don't think are going to get 1%. This is my thinking, but we still have months ahead. Many things could happen in between. There could be political dilemmas in between. But
Raymond, I like referring to Ugandan music, which is very rich in its lyrics. If you listen to Olumberu Omwavu by a Frigo Band, there is a sentence there where they say, meaning, for whatever it is that you're endowed with, let's all be equal before the Lord, and the podcast will act as such.
Yes, I think we should act as such, but we genuinely have to probe some candidates a little bit more because their threshold of success is higher. And because the threshold of success is higher, some of the things they say need to be probed.
But even more, we have an incumbent.
Yes, so the incumbent, for example, we cannot discuss them in much the same way we discuss the people running against him.
Because to whom a lot is given, a lot is expected.
But
let's go back to the question of women offering themselves for the highest office in the land. You know, it was Miria Obote that was the first female candidate. For the presidential election of 2006. And after that, we've since had Betty Kamya, who is the current ombudsman. I don't even know why they don't call it ombudswoman, who offered herself for the presidential election of 2011. Then we, of course, had Maureen Charia, who came in for the 2016 presidential election. And then most recently, a young, vibrant journalist turned politician, Nancy Kalembe, offers herself for the 2016, for the 2021 general election. This time around, she was a no-show, but she came and picked nomination papers.
So I mean, that's it. the disproportionate representation of women in politics in Uganda is not just at a presidential level, it's really everywhere. And I think even when you look at the directly elected members of parliament, you take out the women members of parliament and go just the directly elected members of parliament, the representation of women is still very low. Even lower when you come down to LC5s, who are actually in charge of running district activities. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a matter that
now I've tried to read up from my own, research and see
yeah.
what is it that disenfranchises women from offering themselves for election at that level. And us being a patriarchal society is one element that you just cannot wish away. We are the kind of society that looks at women either as deputies, assistants, or those that we should relegate to being part of the kitchenware. And that is a mindset that ought to change, because as a father of daughters, you and I, we know for a fact that we are putting in painstaking effort in raising our children, not to play second fiddle to their male counterparts. But, I mean, let's see and see whether, and hope, what we have, you and I, is sometime, who knows, we could see a president, a female president.
Yeah, but
although the chances are either one, you know that we have a vice president who's female, and she's a heartbeat away from being president. That is a possibility, as we saw in Tanzania, where now they is now contesting to be president, and she'll possibly win this election that's coming up, I think, next month.
Yeah.
The other way we can hope that a female becomes president is if we pick one of these impeccable women around and they decide to break all these constraining bottlenecks, like a patriarchal society, like a limited financial resources, like stereotyping and all that.
You know, in this existing term that hasn't yet run out of the presidency, if anything were to happen to the president, the constitution mandates that the vice president takes over, and Jessica Lupo would have to fill those shoes.
I said that earlier. Yeah.
Yes. So in that regard, we are not far away from such a scenario where, that we discuss this. But it's also odd that, you have political appointees. For example, the Prime Minister is female.
The Speaker.
The Speaker of Parliament.
Not a political appointee. She went into an election and won it.
She's female. The Speaker before her, of course, if you remove Jacob Olanya, who served a very short term, was female, Rebecca Kadaga. So, we
hold the record in Africa for having the first female vice president. Remember Dr. Speciosa one day?
Yes, and she appears on the hard questions. So for people who need to speak to her, she appears on the hard questions this week. But Simon, I wanted us to talk about the at least three candidates who were nominated this week. And the first was President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, the second was General Mugisha Muntu, and the third was Robert Kyagulanyi. In that order, I think they were nominated in that order.
Let's also be fair to our listeners and those who possibly are not very keen followers of Ugandan politics, that there are other 5 presidential nominees, and they are the following. I had to write them down. Kasimante Robert, Joseph Bamirizi, Nathan Nandala Mafabi, and of course, the amiable Munyagwa Mubarak Serunga, and then Bulirwa Frank Kabinga, who, in all honesty, I would not recognize in a poster. I haven't seen it.
Yes.
I don't know what he looks like.
But so that's why I was asking, are we going to discuss these candidates as one and the same? Because it's very difficult to discuss them as one and the same. Maybe for me, the first discussion would be about Nathan Nandala Mafabi, who has been a traditional Secretary General of the FDC party. It went into the last election, performed very dismally, and now he's become the presidential candidate for the party. What do you think his odds are?
Let me be very honest with you. If the FDC performed poorly at the last presidential election, watch it this time around. It is going to become worse than the previous one, if you ask me. For many reasons. I think along the way we did see the poor performance of the FDC largely then was because their firebrand postcard image of who they are, Dr. Kizza Besigye, did not make it to be the select presidential candidate. Now, what happened is that alone brought some level of disenfranchisement. But since then, we've seen the breakaway from the FDC to create PFF. The PFF. Now that alone, even though PFF does not have a presidential candidate, but let's not forget that Nandala Mafabi, yes, may have been known as a long-time legislator, but does not have the verve and what we would call name and face recognition like the other characters in the presidential race, who are President Yoweri Museveni, of course, no doubt about it, the man in heart, Gregory Mugisha Muntu, who in his quiet demeanor and everything, but he has got a stronger name and face recognition than Nandala Mafabi, and then, of course, the colossus of vibe, Robert Kyagulanyi. I mean, the thing is, I hope that now Ugandans have grown to recognize and identify Robert Sentamu Kyagulanyi away from Bobby Wine, because many people went to the polling stations the last presidential term waiting to look at a dreadlocked guy with the name Bobby Wine, only to find a sharp dressed guy with a proper impeccable haircut.
I think he's done a lot of good political messaging around his name, Robert Kyagulanyi Sentamu. I don't think anyone can miss it. I don't think anyone who intends to vote him will wake up in the morning and unaware to find him.
I will tell you something, Raymond. Yes. Brand and name recognition are very important things that today we've seen so many toothpaste brands continue to struggle, however good they are, but they are roundly referred to as Colgate. Petrol stations have come up with impeccable service, including Starbucks that has a petrol station for every car in Kampala. But still someone saying, Kusange kushero, Starbucks. Newspapers, you ask someone to bring you a newspaper, you're very clear, I need the Daily Monitor, you just say, can't create a new vision, no, but it's the Daily Monitor. So when they ask you for president or presidential elections in Uganda, most likely the postcard image of presidency in Uganda, no fault to any Ugandan who, for 40 years, this man has been the president. And
but for me, two important camps emerged from the nomination, and I was just analyzing this, that both President Museveni and Nathan Nandala Mafabi have decided to run an economics-based campaign.
Yes.
Museveni says he wants to leap Uganda into a lower middle income economy, which I think we shall be even before the first ballot is cast. Nathan Nandala Mafabi says he wants to put money in our pockets. That's a very economic campaign. General Mugisha Muntu and Robert Kyagulanyi have decided to run a justice campaign, which is, can there be justice? Can there be human rights? Can there be fair treatment of individuals in political participation? But also they've run against the record of the incumbent to say, can you hand over power peacefully? I've heard that both for Muntu and Robert Kyagulanyi.
But they also go ahead to discuss or present an economic agenda by way of debunking what President Museveni is putting across as his economic agenda. They are saying, look, with deeply entrenched corruption in every state of affairs in this country, there's no way you're going to tell us of economic growth. Rather, we'll be seeing people thriving and surviving, but from proceeds of corruption. So until you end the governance question of corruption, then we cannot have anything economics to talk about. President Museveni, on the other hand, debunks their justice and human rights issues by saying, look, there's peace and security across the country, and that's why we are protecting the gains. And one of the gains is security for all. And yes, there may not be the insecurity where you are afraid of looking over your shoulders at every time you're walking through the streets of the cities and villages. But of course, the opposition has grounds to question the security of persons and property when they have, supporters of their supporters incarcerated, some of whom their whereabouts are known, and that many of them not seen a single day before court. That is not an issue.
I think that would be the strongest critique that Robert Kyagulanyi brings to this presidency, at least the campaign. One, that the people around him, let's start with who held his umbrella immediately after nomination.
That was a very...
Someone had been detained from the last election for over 4 years without trial, and that spoke to the fact. His own bodyguard, Eddie Mutwe, is not with him right now. He's also in a detention of his own.
His deputy spokesperson,
spokesperson, Waisa Mufumbiro, has been in detention.
He's only lucky that he's a twin and has an identical brother who's out there filling the gap.
Yeah, so it will be very easy for him to make the point that, look here, there's political persecution of members of the National Unity Platform, and that persecution is based off of the fact that they are simply people that oppose the government of the day. And on the other hand, the weaponization of the law to say, some of these people have been arrested for military drilling, which is a law in our law books, but it's being used and applied selectively. So it's going to be, when the election comes down to the wire, I think those two things will be important. One, you're talking economics, but two is your political opponents are being detained and taken away. So those things will define the election, definitely.
But Raymond, you see, we're coming in at a time when currently there is the United Nations General Assembly going on, and we saw President Trump come to the podium, and among the many concerns he had, forget about the not working elevator, the broken down teleprompter, he looked the UN in the eye and told them, look, the issues you've been raising, say climate change, has been the biggest sham on the planet. And let's get to that to the presidential election in Uganda. There seems to be no candidate that's strictly talking about matters of environmental concern, those kind of what you'd call soft pain points. Per se, environmental degradation, protection of natural resources such as clean water and things of that nature. No one seems to be talking about, the question of unemployment from the point of presenting solutions of employment opportunities that would come from vast and rich areas such as the untapped tourism potential that this country has and the hospitality that we do have, but also the space of innovation and tech, if I may put it that way, especially for the young people.
I think the unwritten rule in Ugandan politics is that merit does not succeed in the political structure. So, for example, when you look at the people who are in charge of us politically, you wouldn't necessarily say, so for example, if we're going for a climate negotiation, our leader of that negotiation would be the Prime Minister. You wouldn't say that our Prime Minister is capable of negotiating climate change agreements or is in tune with that. She's a great political mobilizer for the NRM, and the reason she's in the position she's in is because the merit required to get into that position now is to be able to attract masses. And attract masses whilst also coming from a place where government intends to get more than 25% of its revenue, at least starting the next financial year. So the merit structure doesn't reward people who speak about climate change. It doesn't reward people who speak about tech, innovation, and tourism.
And also doesn't seem to reward people who come off Swerve and Bonaire and are calm and collected. I mean, that's why for the longest time you don't see General Mugisha Muntu garnering the kind of support he ought to by virtue of his ethos that we all know. He has a zero tolerance to matters of corruption. He can't stand incompetence. He can't stand the walala of showbiz. And, until now I get surprised he's got this tint line across his hair.
I'm just wondering what's that for?
I may need to ask.
Gray hair strand.
I may need to ask his dear wife Julia on what the fashion statement it is that the Major General is doing and who of his children must have convinced him to do that, because that is only stuff that your children can convince you to do. But so that's why, among other things, Robert Kyagulanyi, incredible guy, but you can see that he galvanizes the firepower of his stardom as a successful musician before to bring in that aura that creates him. Over and above the fact that now I think he's gotten his team, an impeccable team of people who give him just the right things to say. He knows how best to present. Remember, he's cut out for performance. So for him, it's the performance bit. And we've seen President Museveni also coming out to do some performance.
It's very performative.
Yeah, but also President Museveni is now getting performative. You see him running to the podium this time around to send one clear message. Nchali Mboko. I'm still on fire. Yeah, and let's not forget, he has done raps before, so I don't know what this time is going to unleash beyond the jog to the podium that he seems to be now trademarked with.
Yeah, so at the start of this week, of course, I was moderating a conversation between the head of operations at the Uganda Police Force, Frank Mwesi, Commission spokesperson Julius Mchunguzi, and other members who are involved in one, organizing the election, but also involved in civic education.
True.
And the question for me to them was really simple, is the apathy that has followed elections should be like an indictment on the political system in general. More than half of the people who have registered to vote are most likely not going to come and vote. And there are many reasons for that. One of the reasons could be the nature of the candidates in the race. The other reason could be just the violence that accompanies elections. But there's also
that feeling that your vote doesn't count, that even if I want to give Mugisha Muntu, for example, he's a nice guy, yes, but...
Yes, but there's also a strong component of tax-paying Ugandans, about 1.9 million tax-paying Ugandans, who genuinely feel that the political structure cannot deliver what it says it can.
History vindicates them, because you notice that for all the presidential elections that President Museveni has managed to win, for the most part, for some of them, he is the president of the minority, so to speak. So you have a voter turnout of less than 50%, and he garners 51% of the less than 50% of registered voters.
Yes.
So in essence, you realize that President Museveni is president, but he was voted by about 3-point-something million Ugandans in a population of 40 million.
So that indictment on the political structure might in fact form conversation about post-election. I think that we're going to get to a point, and I was doing the numbers on this, This is the last election in Uganda where the number of rural voters will be more than the number of urban voters.
How so? How do you arrive at that, Raymond? Because we've seen this massive wave of rural-urban migration. Every guy in my village, Bugangari, is in Kampala, doing everything that they can land their hands on.
Because of the nature of rural-urban migration, currently there are 2 people in the rural areas for every 1 person in the urban area. In the next 5 years, if we follow the same pattern, it will be switch. There'll be 2 urban people for every 1 rural voter. The apathy in the political system in urban areas also has problems that come with it. So, for example, people may not vote, but they will protest, they will strike, they will do things that you're seeing in Sudan, for example. They could start a civil war or anything like that. It's going to become
That's quite unlikely because
that's what people do. That's what people do. That's part of how people express apathy.
Yeah, but you see here in this part of the country, you know how the military is in firm hands and
exactly.
You know by who.
But that's the thing.
Police is whatever. So we may just have running battles on the streets.
Yes.
But we have also not been very successful in as far as copycatting the Gen Z situation in neighboring Kenya and most recently in Nepal. I think our security forces would beat the living lights out of anyone that comes on the streets. I don't know whether it would be in such critical mass that we can overrun and overpower them.
I don't think that anyone's going to overrun and overpower the system, but I think that you can have a 5 years in which your 5-year term is determined by protests on the streets. This is what we've seen in Kenya. Ruto's entire 5-year term has been defined by the streets.
Yeah, but you know, President Museveni doesn't take the chances that Ruto does take.
Ruto
will allow you to assemble at near Bunge. President Museveni will not allow you exit your home in charge.
Yes, but you know, there are other methods of protest, and this is where I think the political system needs to listen more intently. Simon Kasiate, who drives on Bulindo Road to go into town, might just decide, you know what, the shock absorbers for this car are just too expensive. I'll stop going into town. By being less productive, the amount of taxes you get from Simon reduce. And your ability to pay your soldiers also reduces.
But Raymond,
those are some of the methods.
Yeah, but you see, on to Simon, the individual.
Yeah.
If he becomes less productive, stops going to work, his responsibilities won't stop. He needs to feed his family.
Yes.
He needs to send his children to school. He needs to look good, smell nice, wear bow ties. I don't think those are things that Simon is willing to exchange for a show of protest. Say, I am not going to work.
No.
Raymond, if that was the case, I wouldn't have recorded today's podcast here in Bulindo. Do you know the state of the road, especially after
Because, you know, people do not see the systemic way in which systems force you to do this. There are many people who COVID-19 rendered jobless, and they've been unable to get back into the job economy. Not because they don't want to look good, they don't want to keep their lifestyle. It's just that there are no jobs. There are no businesses. They know where to jumpstart your business. That the structure has forced you out of it. And I think that those are the things that we need to pay attention to. I've been telling my friends across the political divide, yes, compete politically, but recognize that you're competing in a system that's no longer representative. And the only way to get legitimacy in this political system is to get people from the fringes to come and take part in this system.
Raymond, I ask you this question. I mean, we saw over 200 folks coming in to line up to pick nomination forms for the presidency. And we discussed it here on this podcast and said, has the presidency become so cheap that every Tom, Dick, Kasiate and Mujuni now believe they can be presidents of this country? But then there is a sieve that goes through and we get 8 men and you can only place a finger on 4 folks with the name and face recognition, but also the seriousness to stand before you and you entertain them to tell you what their agenda for this country is. When you get a guy like Mubarak Munyagwa, who is known to be, you know, a comedian par excellence, also making it to the ballot of Ugandan politics and leaving folks like you and I and those millions listening to us, young people with impeccable credentials, but also old folks, women like Winnie Byanyima, who have, you know, first aeronautic engineer in this country, works with, you know, you're a director general at the UN, and many other incredible women in this country, of this country, that are making huge strides, not offering themselves to the presidency or offering themselves for political contestation. That in itself is a statement, an indictment of the political system in this country, that we are all shying away from taking the reins and...
It is, and the crisis of that indictment is that you're just waiting for the day. You're snail walking into a problem. It might take forever to get there, but you will still get into a problem. When you see communities and societies where, you know, people are doing bullet trains, innovations, society is progressing, it's because their best and brightest are involved in the system of governance. It doesn't have to be the Western model of democracy, even, for example, the Chinese model of democracy, which some people call autocracy. The level of involvement
of the best brains.
Yes, the level of involvement, yes, is just so high.
Here, if you are an impeccably brilliant, industrious person, like I don't like giving examples of any other person that I know more than I know myself, to imagine that I am not anywhere in the equation of doing anything sensibly in the way government is run, that even the little chance I have had to offer my service to the government of Uganda, you could see the kind of moribund institution I last recently left. And for me, we choose to say, you know what, rather than die within a moribund situation and die with a dying system of governance that doesn't recognize and reward merit, that seems to look at other tenets as opposed to being industrious and all that, then you'd rather step out and start impacting the country in other ways you best know how. Now you can see we're here just grabbing a coffee, Oxford trained.
No. So for me, and this is the thing, like, we don't all have to end up in political competition. We really don't. Some people are brighter than us in that regard. And you've got to dope your hat off for people who are able to do that year on year, attract masses and crowds. Get the incentives that require those crowds to be there and be with you for 3 months and convince the millions to then show up on polling day and vote for you. It's incredible work. I wouldn't even I wouldn't begrudge them. What I think is people need to be active citizens. People need to be involved and engaged as active citizens too. Where you say, if a road is failing, how do you engage as a citizen?
When you ask as an active citizen, and you get no answer and you're looked at with the contempt that you deserve. I mean, how do you explain to me that from Matuga to Chaliwajara, that road project is now entering its 5th year for a project that should have spent 3 years? And we have made all the noise that we can, podcasts like this on national television and in every other place. I think we've also seen some mini demonstrations in little towns because of dust and all. But the government simply just shows you the middle finger.
And the people who want to reform the system.
And you don't seem to see anyone being reprimanded at the Ministry of Works, which I think even now with taking over what was UNRWA, that was, was a flash in the pan, an organization that works in a system that's moribund. They seem to be onto one scheme after another to just rob from us and do nothing and just show.
But I mean, active citizenry is important. It's really important. I saw this week when the ED of your former workplace, Ms. Sharifa Buziki, when she put up her post, says she is encouraged by the work that the contractors are doing. I looked down through the comments and you could see people are giving it to her and saying, look here, if you think this is good work, then you're in for a shocker because these people are not delivering.
Clearly her bar on what is good is where...
Yes, but increasingly, those people who are speaking back are going to become more. Increasingly, they're going to be people who have access. And increasingly, elite contestation is going to happen. Whether you like it or not. Elite contestation is going to happen. And the more that elite contestation happens, the more...
You're such a perennial optimist that sometimes I look at you and I just imagine whether we live in the same country.
No, I don't doubt it.
Do you actually think,
yes,
and I have been through those corridors, that the ED of KCCA is even emotionally bothered by the kind of commentary she got on her post on X? No, for her, I think it was just the tick box thing from the communications team of say, let's drop there and we see what the feedback looks like, and then I don't know whether there are conversations.
No. People will get engaged. So you don't. Sometimes people don't realize how people and power engage. So, for example, Portbell Road. You have many government officials who live on that road. You have many businessmen who live on that road. Their children might complain to them and say, but Daddy, why is this road taking forever? That consistent urge, that consistent ick will force them to pick up the phone and call someone that they think has authority to ask, why is this not happening? And that person will eventually get down to asking the ED, why is this thing not happening?
You're looking at it from the tail end, Raymond.
No, not at the tail end. But this is
I am
how,
a top government official,
yes, this is how political
for one
societies
reason
operate.
or other, I was involved in pushing through my own interests for the tendering process, and I possibly have taken a 10% from the contractor on that road. What more authority would I have to call someone?
Of course, you won't have more authority, but the people demanding for the road will have more authority. And this is why elite contestation is a difficult thing to manage, because Simon Kasiate, who's negotiated the 10% cut on a contract and is now living his decent life, probably in Lower Hill.
Even if it's still on old port payroll, like I do in India,
yes,
I would still have made sure that the 10% catered for
you will have,
robust SUV that doesn't feel the potholes.
Yes, but you will have a Raymond who is not part of your 10% negotiation, who also is an elite and has access, who will then push the bus. And therefore, you end up in elite contestation where someone is asking, why isn't the road being done? And Simon Kasiate, who took the 10%, is saying, but why are you asking many questions when you have skeletons in your closet? As a result, people start to expose their own skeletons.
Raymond, I have had the pleasure of working in institutions that have supported this government in building huge infrastructure projects. I worked at the European Union at around the time when the Northern Bypass, Kampala Northern Bypass was conceptualized. This is a road that should have been built in under 5 years. I can tell you it is over 21 years now, and the 21-kilometer Northern Bypass is not yet complete. And we're not seeing elite contestation that you're talking about that has forced
No. It's there.
Simba Wakati.
Yes.
I went to Uganda Electricity Generation Company Limited, and we had two flagship projects: the Simba Hydropower Station, 183 megawatts, and the 600 megawatts Karuma Hydropower Project. Karuma Hydropower Project, the biggest infrastructure project in this country, perhaps only rivaled by the Uganda Railway, and we're talking about the scale of Mombasa to Nimule. And it took an extra 4 to 5 years beyond what was agreed. And there were communities in West Nile, for example, that were not on the national grid. And we were seeing a deficit in electricity demand in the country. And there was no elite contestation that could have forced us at UEGCL to run the project quicker. If anything, even by the time it was commissioned, there were voices within the same organization that did not want it to be commissioned because of maybe quality assurance issues and the like. But where were they all this time? So, Raymond, I have the feeling that people who charge with the delivery of government projects have gotten to a level of also apathy. They don't give a damn. Because they know that there won't be any administrative sanctioning on them that is more than a slap on the wrist.
No, Simon, so you can accuse me for being an optimist, but there is signaling that is happening. When Suma does what it is doing with Hoima City Stadium, the expectation of the person who next does Nambole changes.
If it is not Suma.
Yes, the expectation changes. And then all of a sudden, people realize Suma will take all the contracts if we don't start to deliver like them. The other alternative...
I'm joking with this place, Raymond.
The other alternative
that you are as proficient as Suma does not guarantee you taking the contracts no matter
No. So that's...
Raymond, I have also had the opportunity to try and vie for positions, and it doesn't matter how good or whatever you bring on the table. They will choose who they choose.
Yes, so we need to end this podcast, though.
But we haven't said a word about the United Nations General Assembly, Raymond.
No, we will have we'll have to take a whole separate podcast to talk about that. In any case, Uganda's statement at the United Nations General Assembly is happening. If you're listening to this on Friday, it's happening on Friday itself.
So we
still have time. We need to see what is in Uganda.
But at least President Ruto did make an impeccable statement saying, look, they're keeping Africa away from the permanent representation at the United Nations Security Council is a great fallacy, that you do not turn a blind eye and ear to a continent with 54 countries, nation states, and over 1 billion people in population. I think he made a fundamental point. Although the indictment on him is, come on, you're the chairperson of the East African community and you are not anywhere close solving an issue of insurgency and
in the DRC, yes.
and closer to home. So, and then you want to go to the United Nations Security Council, but of course, someone has started.
I am first of all, with the UN system, I have two crises for me. One is that it's undergoing change, so there's a new UN Secretary General has to be produced, probably a year, 2 years down the road. So there's some competition for that position. It's increasingly becoming clear that members of the UN who have permanent seats might front a candidate, because they feel like the UN has become moribund. They feel that UN Secretary Generals have become more activist against them. And you're most likely going to see maybe someone like Tom Fletcher go up against someone like Amina Mohammed, who is genuinely the person that deserves to take that seat next. So there's that competition. It's diplomatic competition. People who are not engaged in diplomacy don't have to notice it, but it's informing so many of the statements that are coming up. Yes. It explains why, for example, the United States is, through Donald Trump, of course, saying things like, we are unhappy with the UN. We are unhappy with the way it's being run. Of course, you are unhappy with the way it's being run because you want a candidate to come in. And those things are on the periphery, but they're very important in the political sphere. But I think also that the other thing that I wanted to point to is that small state diplomacy at the UN has become important because of the last 3 years, what Israel has done to Gaza.
Yes, you're right.
What Russia has done to Ukraine have become a very important indicator of you need all your allies on your side. And because of that, small states have now realized if my allyship should count for something, I need to also get some benefits from it.
True.
So that's going to be very pronounced also at the UN. So things like climate change might take a back burner. It's sad, but they might take a back burner for the actual politics to actually play out. If, for example, Russia continues its attack into Poland, it continues its attack into Estonia, we'll have a very different United Nations next year. So I like I said, we should have this discussion separately.
Well,
yes,
I agree with you. And as we conclude, other than, of course, looking at me with green eyes of envy from the 13.5% interest rate on my hard-earned 25-year savings in the National Social Security Fund, you were in that room when this announcement was made. Just give us quickly your thoughts on what you think the NSSF is doing right, if at all. I mean, I am a conflicted person in the sense that I was hired out as the moderator for the event. I've done some incredible work with the NSSF, with their campaign with Friends with Benefits, and I'm looking forward to having another engagement with them, especially on telling the incredible life stories of those who have picked up their 20% after clocking the age of 45, where I am way past that mark. So it's important. So I am a conflicted person that I don't want to think that I'm able to make an indictment or a statement of kudos without being looked at as, what do you expect of Simon?
So in under a minute, the thing I will say, what NSSF is doing right is that its investment portfolio is looking like a safe investment portfolio for pensions. They are invested in safe assets, and those safe assets are making heavy returns for them. That's a good thing. The investment in equities have not paid off this financial year, but they will pay off in the long run because equity markets are just rebounding. I think the investments in real estate, some of them are very questionable, some have been a success, and maybe they are succeeding in that regard. So they're doing well in the investment of savers' money to try and generate a profit from them and increase the payment that they give to savers every financial year.
Now I know the elephant in the room you're bringing forward. How are they able then to hedge government's huge infrastructure projects?
Yes, so I think they should be very careful, for example, about their appetite for lending to government. Because the government is going to change its nature of borrowing, given that in the next financial year, they will get oil. And once they get oil revenue, their capacity to go for bills and bonds will reduce. And that might have an impact on the pricing of the bonds. But also the number of members coming into NSSF is reducing. The amount of money they're bringing into the NSSF is not that much. And the NSSF now has to contend with becoming a political organization because they now have to talk about broadening the economy. And they have to talk about getting jobs in the economy, functional jobs in the economy, which is a political conversation. Unfortunately, IOTA has to engage in that conversation politically. Also, they need to do more for their savers. They need to find a way in which savers can hedge some of their savings
for long-term investments, like mortgages.
So those, in a nutshell, that's what some of what's going right, some of what's going wrong.
I have a feeling as we conclude that there is a disturbing disparity on the figures. They say they've got about 3-point-something members with accounts, but then the active accounts are less than 1 million. But even of those less than 1 million people, 20% of them, I wanted to say 20% of us, own or have deposits equivalent to 80% of the total deposits in that place. That should tell them something about attracting a baseline of new savers and making it an attractive place for people to hedge their savings.
Yeah, I mean, NSSF is living in its glory days, if you look at it that way. And anyone who is seated at the helm of it must realize that these are the glory days. This is the gilded edge of the NSSF. If you don't take a robust investment now, you will not succeed down the road. 10 years down the road, I don't think NSSF will be the same structure it is. In any case, people will want to privatize pensions. People will now
there's a law already in place.
Yes, they'll move away from this compulsory saving with NSSF. And once that goes away, then people can choose different vehicles in which to put their money. And for me, again, like I say, NSSF it's a blink of good light in a very bad place. It's been a functional institution. For all its faults, it still delivers. And people still working there get paid in 5 days when you claim. And that's a good thing.
In my case, less than 2, so.
Exactly. So, yes.
Well, I'm not reading anything this week, Raymond, so don't ask me. But I was glad this week to watch a documentary that you sent to me on back HSBC. And I have asked you to send me many more of those.
First, pay me for my otherwise good work in that regard.
But for you who watch and follow us here at Grab a Coffee Podcast, it's always a pleasure having you. And we implore you to continue staying with us and asking your friend to subscribe and listen to us every single week when we drop this special edition. We'll come back same time, same place next week. But like Raymond said, we'll have special conversations in different facets. And like we've started the silly season in Uganda for politics, at some point we may go that direction and have conversations with those 8 men that have offered themselves to be president of this good republic.
Thank you so much for you who is not reading. The rest of us are reading. I'm reading this very large profile of Xi Jinping, and I will let you know what comes from it.
I've read one such of him, and he is quite a character.
The book is just called Z, so it's the one I'm reading. It's a very large volume, so I'll see how it goes. Yeah.
What's the font size?
The font is very small, but also because I'm taking a break next week, so I'll have a lot more time on my hands, and we'll record the next week's podcast from wherever I will be taking my break from.
It will grab you from wherever it is that will catch you. God bless.